Okay, so colleagues, it's gone 11 o'clock. Welcome to the next in the series of the Cities Network communication webinars. I'm going to ask Lebo just to do the welcome this morning.
Thanks, Rihanna. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Lebogang Lichuba, and I've just recently joined the South African Cities Network, and I'm responsible for marketing and communications. I really look forward to these sessions since joining the team, because I feel it's a space where, as communication practitioners, we get to speak frankly about our experiences, share lessons and ideas with each other. And that really was the intention of creating this reference group. So I really look forward to a conversation today that's very open and frank. And part of the reason why we also decided to close the session today is to create a space where we could share ideas with each other on how to optimize how we run the reference group and how it could be of more value to yourselves, colleagues. Also to the new colleagues who've just joined us, we welcome you, and we hope to just forge closer relations with you as we move forward with this reference group and as it evolves and grows. I think in the previous sessions, we focused a lot of our conversation around, the communication activities focused on COVID-19, and the last discussion really looked at how do we start balancing pandemic-orientated communications with other communication activities that practitioners still have to carry out. So in today's session, we really want to just take time to reflect more on communication activities around economic recovery efforts and how, as practitioners, you're navigating that and dealing with that those challenges. But also you'll see in the agenda, the second session really looks at then how we can hone in on how we optimize this group and how we use the space ourselves to make it work for us. So with that said, thank you all for graciously accepting the WhatsApp invitation. I know that sometimes people get very frustrated with being invited to various groups on WhatsApp, but we'll do our best to make that platform as well very valuable, and we can also discuss the kinds of content that you guys would like us to share with you on our WhatsApp group. So I'm looking forward to today. I hope that you all enjoy the session with us. Thank you, Rihanna.
Thanks, Lebo. And can I say an additional special word of welcome to our guest from City Support Program, Karen Harrison, who will also get an opportunity to check in a few minutes. So, colleagues, as Lebo has indicated, today's session is very much focused on the economic recovery efforts. So we've had the opening and welcome just by way of agreements, permission to record the session. Of course, today we're using a combination of MS Teams and Mural. We, as usual, will capture your inputs on the screen. You will be muted. If you need to speak, please raise your virtual hand. And if you want to use the chat box, do that as well. Any technical issues, please contact Sean. His WhatsApp number is there. We are requesting your permission to record the session for documenting purposes. So with that, I want to move to check-ins, but before we do that, just want to share with you an image that was created by an artist in Cape Town fairly early in the lockdown, and apologies, I can't even remember the artist's name, but this person has actually been creating an art piece for every day of lockdown, then selling it and contributing the money to relief efforts. But this particular image was quite striking because I think it really is the constant challenge that all of government is facing between the balancing health and the right to life with the economy and the economic repercussions of lockdown. And so really asking you as you check in to give us your name, the city you're representing, and then your biggest fears for the economy, your highest hopes for the economy. So if we can allow people to check in, and I'm just going to try to call up colleagues who are here. So maybe let's start with Mandla Nsele.
Hi, good morning, colleagues. Indeed, this is Mandla Nsele. I'm trying to switch on my camera so that you can see me. Can you see me now?
Yes, now we do, Mandla. Yes.
Yeah. Greeting to colleagues. I'm greeting you from the Kingdom of the Zulus. I'm representing eThekwini municipality, the only metropolitan municipality in the kingdom. So I'm happy to participate in today's session. I could not participate in the previous sessions due to clashing of diaries. One of the things I've realized with COVID-19 is that we are always swamped with meetings. We are always double booked. I think we meet more than before. So I think it's one of the advantages of COVID-19 that's brought in the workplace, that you can meet beyond your normal working hours, even in the evenings, over the weekends, you can meet anywhere. But with that, it comes with a number of meetings whereby you have a clashing meetings. So I'm happy that I could make it today. I just came from the disciplinary hearing matter. Unfortunately, it was short. So yeah, I'm excited to participate in today's session. I'm hopeful that I'll get a lot from my other colleagues from other cities, because I believe that our environment is more or less the same in terms of the current situation we're faced with at the moment. The biggest fear at the moment, I think it applies with all the cities, is that of dwindling rate collections. I think we at eThekwini have been impacted quite a lot in terms of the collection of rates. Our city has been one of the cities in the country which has been able to collect over 95%. Actually, we were collecting over 100% last year until late last year when we dropped.
So Mandla, I'm gonna allow you to open up content for now. If I can ask you to just focus on your individual biggest fear, so it's the dwindling rates collections and highest hopes. Correct. Just so that we can do a quick round of check-ins and have everyone check in, and then we will definitely open for discussion on more details on some of these issues. So your highest hope for the economy in your city?
Yeah, our hope is that the current situation improves so that the city can be able to collect enough revenue. Remember, our core function is that of providing services. So we do highly depend on the same revenue that we collect. So that will be our hope, that the current situation improves speedily.
Wonderful. Mandla, thank you for joining us, and we really look forward to your inputs going forward. Luvuyo?
My name is Luvuyo Bangazi. I'm in Nelson Mandela Bay. I don't work for the city. I work for a company operated or owned by the city, which is the Mandela Bay Development Agency, kind of like your JDA up there. My biggest fear at the moment is really around perhaps our lack of readiness to accelerate the restart of the economy more efficiently, with speed and effectively. That's my fear. I think we all want to do it, but I'm not sure if we have the capacity and the necessary will to actually get it done. My hope is that during this time we've actually had to survive and make things work, and kind of like these platforms here where we're now able to multitask and do a whole lot more. We've become more resourceful. So my hope is that as we restart the economy, we can tap into this resourcefulness and I'm not talking about us now as practitioners or as government bureaucracy, but as ordinary South Africans, that we find within us the resourcefulness to get out of this hole that we find ourselves in. Thank you.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Can we take Antoinette?
Morning, Chair. Yes, I think my biggest fear is that.
So Antoinette, just tell us where you're coming from.
Oh, sorry, I'm from the city of Tshwane, Pretoria, for those people who don't know where Tshwane is. I think my biggest fear is that the work losses that happened over the past few months will be permanent. And my hope is that our people can really get back on their feet as soon as possible. Yeah.
Thanks, Antoinette. Yeah. Lovely to have you here. I'm just going to ask my Cities Network colleagues to also assist me to identify people on the participant list, but let's take Palesa.
No, cool.
Colleagues, please keep yourself on mute if you're not talking. Palesa.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for the opportunity. Morning, colleagues. My name is Pelisa. I'm from the South African Cities Network. I look after strategy reporting and governance. My biggest fear is our lack of agility or our capability to respond to what is currently happening. And my biggest hope is that we shift our thinking from long-term planning that is based on a set of assumptions to options and a range of scenarios that can allow us to be agile and respond effectively as circumstances change. I think that's the only solution that is effective to deal with the current crisis we have.
Okay, thanks, Palesa.
Thank you, colleagues.
Samkelo?
I think he's muted his mic. We also have Reho Mavimbela. Maybe she can go.
Hi. Okay, my name is Reho Mavimbela from City of Ekurhuleni. I'll turn my camera on. Okay, thank you for the invite, and I'm glad to be part of this. Looking forward to the presentation. The biggest fear is that of the loss of productivity due to people being sick or being afraid of the time and the challenge that we're going through, or I think more importantly, going through the emotional burden actually of family being infected with COVID, or neighbors or the like. And I think there is hope. I think what you are going to give us, there is hope. The other fear is the lack of tangible digital skills in government. So the hope is that we can equip ourselves with those skills so that in future we are able to communicate seamlessly from wherever we are. We don't have to really be in the office or within four walls. Thank you.
Thanks, Reho. Lebogang, I'm just going to ask you to help me to identify city spokespersons and communicators in particular, right?
Okay.
So if you can see them, that will help.
All right, Tobeka is also on the call, if you can hear us.
Tobeka, are you able to come in? So we're just seeing who we are, which city,
hello?
biggest fears, highest hopes. Tobeka?
Hello. Yes, I'm here from Sunduzi municipality.
Okay, Tobeka, your biggest fears about economic recovery, your highest hopes?
Oh, gosh. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Biggest fears, it's more people actually losing their jobs. Hello, Rihanna.
Rebecca, your highest hope about economic recovery?
Oh, gosh. The highest hope, I think, for me would be we just need to reconfigure. We've been speaking about the fourth industrial revolution. People just need to be skilled in digital ways of doing things and identify business opportunities in the space of digital.
Okay, Lebo, is there any other city that we've missed?
We've got Sohana Singh from eThekwini.
Sohana, please introduce. You're welcome. Please go ahead. Sohana, your biggest fear about economic recovery, your highest hope? Okay, colleagues, I'm going to move on in the interest of time. As other colleagues join us, I'm sure they'll introduce themselves. So I'm going to ask our guest to introduce herself. And yes, Lungelo?
I see there's Tiro, and then Tiro is from Ekurhuleni as well, and then there's Samkelo from Buffalo City Municipality. Yeah, I'm not sure who else I'm missing. Mapungu, anyone we are missing?
Okay, Lungelo, I'm gonna suggest just so we've got Nkosanati's got a hand up. Nkosanati.
Well, I'm Kosnal Kaminde from the city of Johannesburg. I also saw my colleagues Tumelo Komape from the city of Johannesburg as well.
Okay, and Nkosanati, just very quickly, so we won't allow full teams necessarily, as long as we have a sense of the cities that are here, and then we'll invite your voices in down the line. But Nkosanati, your biggest fears about economy, your highest hopes?
Yeah, well, my biggest fear, I think there's a key thing in the city of Johannesburg currently. As we started opening the economy, we also saw seeing the rise in terms of new infection, particularly in the inner city as well as Soweto, because around the inner city, that's where most of the activities take place in terms of economy. So that is our biggest fear, as we started
your
opening
highest
the economy.
hope. Highest hope.
Our highest hope is to say is to as communicators is to be able to send out the message to people to make sure that they follow the health protocol that are set up by government to ensure that we reduce the number of infections.
Okay, Samkelo, I did call you before. I'm not sure if you're able to hear us. I'm going to make this the last introduction and then allow a guest to check in.
Good morning. Sorry, I've been just in and out. Sorry, good morning.
It's fine. Morning, Samkelo. So the check-in is just which city you're from, and then we're talking economic recovery today. So what are your biggest fears around economic recovery and your highest hopes?
Hi, everyone. Well, from our side, I think we were very much taken aback when our airport wasn't part of the list, the first list. It was a big issue for us. As you know, we are hosting the capital in the side of the world. So that was the first fear. That has since been lifted. The port has been operating. So from our side as well, the two areas in terms of the economic development of our cities that we're bidding for a big contract with Mercedes-Benz. I don't know if people know Eastern, and they know we actually are dependent on a huge part of that component. So that was the first part, I think. And then, of course, I think one cannot overrule the fact that in our command center meetings, businesses are crying. A lot of them have been bailed out, but the sad reality is that a lot of them have to close down, and they're looking at us at local government to make that our competency. And unfortunately, we don't have a pot of gold to bail out businesses. And lastly, as a city in itself, we've taken a huge knock in terms of our revenue collections. Our projections were at 92%. I think we've hit about 86%, and that tells you we've also, as a municipality, have taken a knock. So we are sitting around trying to scratch our head as to.
Samkelo, like I did with other people, I'm just going to ask you to focus on the highest hopes because we're going to open into further discussion that's city specific. But right now, just as Samkelo, your highest hope for economic recovery.
Normal. I think that would be to save as many businesses as possible and actually have the economy open up for all sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Samkelo. So that was Buffalo City. At this point, I'm going to invite in our guest for this session, Karen Harrison, who's the lead at City Support Program on Economic Development. Karen, it's wonderful to have you with us. If you'd please check in your biggest fears and highest hopes for economic recovery.
Yeah, just to say good morning to everyone and to thank you for inviting me into your forum. It's a real privilege and I'm looking forward to the discussion we have today. It's going to be good to hear perspectives from the communicators side. So in terms of my biggest fear, I share with other colleagues the fear of massive job losses and not being able to recover from that. My biggest hope is that we have the opportunity to try and rebuild a more sustainable, inclusive economy. And I hope we all work towards that end. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. So colleagues from Cities Network, I'm not necessarily going to ask you to check in, but we note that you're on the call and it's wonderful to have you with us. We're now going to move into a conversation with Karen. So Karen does a number of things at City Support Program around the economy and metros. There's a township economic development program, there's subnational doing business, there's partnerships for inclusive growth. But one of the things Karen also is doing is chairing a forum of economic development managers in the cities, Economic Development Managers Forum. And so Karen has a real overview and insight of the economic recovery plans and efforts that are happening in many of your cities. And we're really pleased, Karen, that you've been able to join us this morning. So really, Karen, in terms of having a conversation around economic recovery, what exactly is happening in South Africa's metros and who is thinking about economic recovery in these metros?
Okay, thank you so much, Rihanna. I think it's useful to put in context when we talk about economic recovery, just to speak very quickly around the crisis we are facing and the depth of that crisis and what it means to try and work around economic recovery. So I think we're all aware, and I won't state it too much, that COVID-19, the pandemic, hit us when we were already at a very weak economic point. Our economy was already struggling. We were getting decreasing tax revenue, increasing unemployment over 29% already, very high levels of household indebtedness, state-owned enterprises that were already weak, credit down ratings. So we were hit at this point. So we are talking now, when we get the recent research coming up, our NIDS-CRAM, the researchers that have been doing surveys, academic researchers, talking about 3 million job losses over the last couple of months under lockdown. And we're all very much aware of the huge pressures on businesses and the business failures that are happening, the huge increases in household food insecurity. We've just heard about declining municipal revenue. We've seen signs of declining levels of trust within our society, and government as a whole really having to work on budget cuts, budget reprioritization, and austerity measures. So just even the last couple of days, we've heard about how government has had to go cap in hand to the IMF to also look for additional budgets. So we're facing a huge challenge, and economic recovery, that conversation needs to be located there. And when we're talking about economic recovery, we're also talking here about the role of metros. That metros have performed, they have contributed more than half of our GDP, they've contributed more than half of our jobs. So the impact of this economic recession and the pandemic in these spaces is vast. the impact is felt on households, it's felt on businesses, and yet the metros need to respond and lead that response. And when we're talking about metros leading that response, we're also saying that we are leading the response from a situation where we already have had our own challenges. We had challenges with the fast pace of urbanization. We have very inefficient spatial forms in our cities, very high levels of inequality and poverty, and very high levels of governance challenges. We've got a number of municipalities now under administration or being considered, so really deep challenges within our cities. And dealing with economic recovery being really hard within this space. So when we look at how cities have responded or how they have managed to cope, we see that the COVID-19 pandemic has continued to expose some of these weaknesses. We see some institutional failures being exposed, business continuity issues. One of the colleagues mentioned the fact that we need greater digitization. So a lot of the cities under extreme lockdown, business processes did not continue. And so that impacted on the development pipeline within those cities. It impacted on the revenue of those cities. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that now. For example, with deeds office backlogs within the country. So also the fact that we've got weak governance and weak systems and sort of slow responses to a growing pandemic where we really needed quick responses, exposing citizens to greater vulnerability. But even within that context, I think the COVID-19 has shown positives, and it has seen mobilization of resources and mobilization of efforts at an unprecedented scale recently. So we saw national government coming out and national government looking at 4 sort of key interventions that they launched in response to this. The extraordinary health budget. They gave additional municipal funds of about 20 billion to metros for emergency water, sanitation, to look at the homeless, to look at relief in that regard. There's also been a lot of social funding of relief for hunger and distress in our society. And there's been support for companies and workers that national government has given out. And they've worked in terms of the phased reopening of the economy that we're all aware of. So there have been support measures. The challenge has been around how some of those measures have landed and the fact that a lot of the measures were done quickly, but we'll come to that a bit later. But then at a city level, cities have also been responding, and that's been really encouraging. So cities' responses have sort of been at an immediate short-term level, or immediate level, and then looking more into the short term. So the immediate level has been about how do you deal with this disaster? How do you activate? How do you react? How do you coordinate relief measures? And then as cities are sort of looking at the fallout of what's happening, then looking at sort of more short-term measures and starting to look forward in terms of how can we work with sectors and so on. So I think there's a key issue with economic development is that cities cannot do it alone. That economic development requires partnerships. It requires partnerships within government, with national government, provincial, state-owned enterprises, and it requires partnerships in society. So that being core to cities understanding a response and a meaningful response.
Can I come in on this issue in relation to, the importance of partnerships, but just, you're speaking to economic development practitioners. The kind of relief efforts you're talking about, whether they come from national government or cities, and what that means for communicators, because we've seen in the media that there's been such a focus on the misuse of funds, on the misuse of instruments that have been made available. What would be your advice from what you know about what's in the economic recovery plans? What would be your advice for city communicators on how best to position themselves in relation to their economic development colleagues, and what are the key messages that we should be landing in the public domain?
Yeah, no, I think that's very key, and I think one of the obviously city communicators are well positioned, and there are information flows and so on that that they coordinate. But the question is, there are a lot of efforts being done by cities around economic recovery, and I'll give some examples. But if you look at research that's coming through around trust levels between citizens and government, and between companies and government, you're not seeing increasing trust levels, you're seeing decreasing trust levels. So the question is, how effectively is this information being communicated? And how effectively are sort of communicators engaging with their sector departments and with units such as economic development to really understand what is happening and who should they be communicating with? So just to give some examples of what cities are doing, which communicators might not be aware of, but and maybe you are. I mean, for example, some cities have done a lot of work around communicating through economic development departments, but it might be with their broader communications units as well, where they have they communicate with businesses on business relief measures. So they have business support finder tools. And I know, for example, definitely eThekwini and City of Cape Town and Nelson Mandela Bay have been pretty active in that. Other cities like eThekwini and Cape Town have been undertaking city surveys, economic surveys, and they've been engaging with firms, hearing what firms are saying, and then designing their relief measures around that. But hopefully that information is then flowing to the communicators in the cities as well. Surveys that deal with the impact of COVID-19 on the firms, but also on payment trends, customer payment trends in the city. There are other platforms where some of the cities like Joburg and eThekwini have been very active in engaging directly on private sector platforms. So talking to the private sector directly, trying to understand what's happening, what kind of support they need. Other cities have been a bit weaker in this regard. And then in terms of sharing information on public procurement, the City of Joburg in particular has been very active in trying to link firms to public procurement opportunities and trying to get that information out, and also driving partnerships to address certain challenges. So City of Joburg, for example, has a partnership around clinic building repairs and maintenance to try and comply with COVID-19 health requirements, and so really driving that. And then some cities have been involved in skills training and development. So most cities now are moving towards their economic recovery plans and encompassing a number of these elements which could be communicated very effectively. But the issue, the challenge is on a number of different levels, and that's where communicators need to also advise and to assist, is a lot of the planning that is being done in silo. So in one metro we've been working with, for example, we are aware of 2 economic recovery plans. So even within the city, there hasn't been coordinated economic recovery planning and saying how are we as a city going to respond to this. In most cities, we found that there's very little evidence of economic recovery planning that is being done together with other stakeholders, like other government players or like private sector partners. And that's a huge weakness if you think around the challenges we've got to face and the need to drive partnerships and so on. So just to share with you, I think some of the research that's come out recently from Ask Africa, which is a private sector firm that's doing pro bono research at the moment to they basically measure about 7,000 respondents and saying, how are respondents perceiving government's interventions at this time? And when it comes to questions like, is the government doing a good job in supporting its citizens during lockdown? At a national level, 56% of people are saying fair, but within different cities, 44% in City of Cape Town disagree. They don't think government's doing a good job. 41% in Buffalo City disagree. 47% in Nelson Mandela disagree. In City of Joburg, it's about 48% that disagree. But that's sort of the perception of the public.
Can I ask you, the Ask Africa survey that you're referring to, would it be possible that we could share it with our communicator colleagues so that they can kind of study it in more detail? Of course, these are perception surveys, but as our communicators would know, perception is everything. It doesn't matter what the reality is. Once people perceive something, it becomes their reality. So would it be possible to share that Ask Africa survey with our colleagues?
Yeah, I don't see that as a problem. Or they have shared it with us for the City Economic Development Managers Forum. So I can't imagine, and they said they're happy for it to be shared. So I can't see that there would be any problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other perceptions that were coming up was the question in the Ask Africa survey about whether the government is taking appropriate steps to prevent the spread of the outbreak. In terms of, again, it's useful because there are mixes or differences amongst the cities. So citizens living in eThekwini, City of Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Mangaung actually show more confidence in the steps the government has taken than in other cities. So that is quite interesting as well in terms of communicators and maybe learning from each other in terms of what's working and what is not. What is happening now, though, as we're moving from the different levels of lockdown, from the extreme lockdown to where we're at now, fewer respondents are believing that government is doing a good job in informing and educating South Africans. So the confidence levels actually going down, and a lot of feedback around government needing to increase their efforts in informing and educating citizens about the spread of the virus, and particularly the City of Cape Town coming up as an area of weakness where this needs to be improved. So a lot of support, a lot of feedback that's coming up from the survey. From businesses, where Ask Africa asks whether the government is doing a good job in supporting businesses during the lockdown. 44% of businesses or citizens disagreed in Cape Town, 47% disagreed in Nelson Mandela Bay, and 46% in Joburg. So a relatively large group of citizens. And I think the key message would be, how do we prevent this trust slipping any further? What steps can we take as communicators to intervene now so we don't see these numbers on a downward trend as the situation in the country and the pandemic, the impact worsens and extends?
So Karen, I'm quite keen if it's possible that we actually open into a bit of conversation at this point. So colleagues, I mean, just listening to Karen, and I know that there's tons of information both on the economic recovery and on the Ask Africa survey, right? But almost you are the bridge between your city's economic development practitioners and the public, and this ability to maintain trust when everyone has the same hopes and fears that we've just articulated earlier. People are dealing with losing loved ones. People are afraid. The overall environment for communication is tough already. So I really want to open up to a conversation between yourselves and Karen, rather than me just being in conversation with Karen. So I'm going to allow Karen to continue, but if people want to raise questions, please raise your hand so that we can have more of a conversation about these issues. So please feel free to raise your hand if you're having specific questions. Karen, you can proceed and I'll watch for hands.
So when I was thinking about what does it mean for communicators around this challenge of building trust and partnerships at this time, and really underpinning a number of issues, like the necessity that given the extent of the crisis, government cannot respond on its own. We cannot. There are not sufficient finances available. We need innovation. If we are going to come out of this crisis stronger as an economy, a more sustainable, inclusive economy, we need to open up the space for engagement, for dialogue, for new thinking, for creative thinking. So what is the role of communicators, and sort of where do communicators need to play within this space? And I was thinking there's a number of issues. The first thing is communicators really need to have evidence-based scientific communication. We need to be making sure that what we communicate to the public is sound, because if one doesn't communicate reliable data, reliable information, it undermines trust. So one of the challenges we are finding from the economic side is that it's very difficult to get city-level data available for communicators. So some of the work we've been trying to do recently is engage in sector departments that are rolling out some of the business relief measures to ask them information about how many firms have applied, how many beneficiaries have there been. The same thing with the UIF, Temporary Employer Relief Scheme. How many applicants have been made? You know, what are the challenges been? So there's been a lot of the need to open up that information so that citizens can hear. You know, it might be the perception that business support isn't flowing, but this is the reality. So really working collectively to get access to that information. Also, city administrative data. Cities have information.
Karen, can I ask you to hold on? We have a question from Luvuyo. Luvuyo, please come in.
Thank you for that. I think, you know, on the city-specific data by sector departments, I get you. There isn't sufficiently enough for us to make decisions and obviously communicate. But I think it's also a lack of maybe preparedness from cities in understanding and having business intelligence or business information around, you know, who's in their city, what's the payroll, what is the current workforce, where are vacancies, so that businesses actually, you know, so that cities can actually be more proactive instead of waiting for a Department of Trade and Industry to tell them who's in their town. So I think there really is an opportunity here for cities to work closely with industry and build business intelligence. You know, in other parts of the world, I was fortunate to go out to the US and see how they manage business improvement districts, for example, where I think Joburg's got a few or one, in that there's a collaboration of business intelligence that's sourced from ground up instead of from top down. That's just my contribution.
No, Luvuyo, I totally agree with that, and that's incredibly important, because there's this information flow we're wanting from top down, but cities also play a really important role in facilitating information from bottom up. So just in terms of, for example, around the impact of relief measures and accessibility of firms, providing that information back into the system so that government programs can be adjusted and reviewed on that basis. Also, in terms of a lot of the cities that we spoke about, eThekwini, City of Cape Town, Tshwane is starting to do it, Ekurhuleni is starting to do it, actually running up business surveys to try and get information, to collect local information, which they can also feed back into the system. But it works both ways. We need more intelligence available nationally. And one of the projects we're working on at the moment, which will help us in future in the cities, is mining income tax data. which will allow us to spatially understand where are firms located within our cities, what sectors are they represented, how many jobs, where are jobs located, and that's going to be a huge burst. But there has been a dearth of that information. The other issue with communicators is accessing available information. Like, for example, there's health data information. Some provinces like Gauteng and its city of Tshwane have been quite proactive in accessing health data and really up-to-date data. I know eThekwini and Western Cape government have worked for some time now to make sure there's information flows. I don't know if it's the same across the country, but we heard recently through the SACN that cities were needing that data. So there's also a proactive level of accessing that data and using it. And then also using cities' own admin data regarding payment levels, admin data regarding requests for rental extensions or payment deferments. All of that information can feed into this picture of what's really happening within that space. Then just in terms of communication, I think there's also the role of communicators is internally as well as externally. So the importance of communicating to internal stakeholders like the political leadership, the importance of feeding data, feeding communication about what's happening. So the political leadership has information on the impact, the economic, the social impact. Feeding key messages like the importance of collaborative leadership and partnerships into that space, feeding stakeholder input around the level of trust within the city through customer satisfaction surveys. All of that information is really critical so that the political leadership can stay connected, can stay accountable, can stay responsive. And then also, yeah, go for it, Rihanna.
So Karen, I mean, I just want to take a very, very specific example, right? Which now today has created real issues from a comms perspective. I mean, there's been the requirement of limit of 50 at funerals, social distancing, and so forth. And unfortunately, an image that seems to have broken the news this morning in relation to Ntate Malangeni's funeral yesterday, and almost the sense that you tell us one thing, but you go ahead as politicians and you do something different. That's an absolute communicator's nightmare. That's not an economic recovery issue, but I almost have a vision in my mind now to say, well, if our leaders don't social distance, if they're more than 50 at a funeral, we're going to do the same thing. So, I mean, the one thing I'm interested in from our communicator colleague perspective, what information are you needing from your economic development colleagues to help you to communicate what it is that you need to do? So, is the information flowing to you? Are there gaps? It will be useful to get your perspectives on this.
Yeah. No, Rihanna, just your comment around the importance of political leaders taking the lead and showing leadership at this time is really critical. You can just see the impact of Trump and refusing to wear a mask for so long, and the mixed messages that were given in that society and the impact. So really, that communication.
I'm seeing a hand from Mandla. Can I allow Mandla?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you, Karen. Now, I would like to make an input around the issue of trust insofar as the business stakeholders are concerned with the municipalities. I think one of the mistakes that we make as a government is that of putting everybody in the same basket, including our business stakeholders. These are our specific special stakeholders which we need to engage separately from the normal platforms of communication that we are using. But unfortunately, from time to time, you find that the responsibility of dealing with these key stakeholders of the municipality, because the municipalities, like I said earlier on, are highly dependent on the revenue that we collect. So you cannot put them in the same basket with every stakeholder of the municipality. They need dedicated individuals to engage with on a daily basis so that their information needs are identified and are addressed accordingly. What we have done at eThekwini as part of addressing the problem was that I think early last year, if not the other year, we identified the top, I think it was the top 100 income generators for the city, who were allocated customer relationship managers. These are the people who are over and above of what we are doing as a communication department, but we've got a customer relationship manager like you will have with your bank, someone who will deal with your requirements on daily basis, so that it doesn't become a once-off project, but it becomes a relationship which is ongoing on daily basis. I think through that I saw improvement in our relationship with the number of business people, particularly our top businesses with the city, because there is that open line of communication with these customer relationships managers. Thank you.
Yeah, just to come in and say, Mandla, I really think that that's a really positive step, and eThekwini has been very proactive. And I think the fact that eThekwini had established business communication platforms before the pandemic has also placed them in really good stead to build those relationships into the future. So, for example, eThekwini, in addition to your top 100 income generator team, has a sector-based relationships. So we worked with them recently with the auto sector and facilitated a discussion because eThekwini had established relationships with the sector organizations and sector bodies within eThekwini because the auto sector is so important to the city. So that being really critical, and saying communicators don't necessarily have to lead in all these platforms, but they need to support their colleagues and encourage their colleagues to have them set up. And Mandla, what you said about segmenting your market is really critical in terms of communication. So when it comes to firms, for example, one of the sectors that we feel is really under-communicated with at the moment are the informal businesses. So what we saw in COVID, when informal businesses were initially shut down and then had to be permitted, the kind of relationship that seems dominant between informal traders and cities appears to be more a regulatory one. Meanwhile, in terms of the informal sector now and its role in economic recovery and social relief, it is immense because of the challenges we're facing. So that sector really needing to be nurtured and supported and communicated with. Communicated in terms of health and safety in the immediate term, communicated with in terms of support measures that are available, communicated with in terms of city functions that can support it, in terms of availability of land, buildings, Wi-Fi access, storage, services, that sort of sector really needing engagement and communication with. And then SMEs and so on too, yeah.
Just want to share from the box, some Kelos put into the chat box that, it's very important for communicators not to go out and communicate for the sake of it. For instance, in our case, that being Buffalo City, our economic work stream is not the strongest, and therefore we have engagements, but we can safely evaluate that there's a great need of work, a great amount of work that needs to be done to get the level of data that we would like to issue out. It's a sector that has been joined and forced to work together by COVID. So this notion of, particularly I think, us lay people who don't understand economics, and for many communicators, I would assume that economics and economic recovery is quite a scary subject because you're speaking to organized business, you say the wrong thing or you're communicating the wrong messages publicly. The notion of, the economic ramifications for your municipality can be quite scary. I mean, what advice would you have for communicators in relation to the way in which, so clearly trust building, partnerships, evidence-based scientific communication that you've raised, but how much do you need to know about economics and the economy to be communicating these issues, and how much should you be, creating the space for your economic development colleagues to be speaking on these issues? What would you see as the role of communicators in this instance?
Yeah, so I think that is important because communicators are not experts on all subjects. They have to rely on their colleagues that specialize in different areas to help with developing the measures and so on, the messages. But I think where communicators can play a really important role is in terms of facilitating, highlighting, you know, like looking at data, analyzing data, highlighting the areas where communication is needed, where platforms need to be set up, working with those sector departments in honing the communication messages, making sure that those messages stay online with the broader city vision and approach. So I think it is very much a collaborative, facilitative, supportive, advisory role that communications play in these spaces, but not asking them to go out there and act as the specialists within every field, because that is not possible. That's not going to happen.
So I'm seeing Luvuyo's hand, and then I'm almost imagining, Karen, that our economic development colleagues might say, but actually, I don't have the ability to communicate. That's why we have a communications department. I'm an economist, not a communicator. But let's take Luvuyo, and then we can come back to that. Luvuyo?
Thank you, guys. I think, yeah, I really like this theme of building trust and actually communicators finding a niche and playing a role in this conversation, because, you know, I'll make an example. In our city here, you know, we monitor obviously communications and media, and as the communications team, when I say as a team, myself including the guys across the road, we looked at the sentiment coming from organized business, and it wasn't really great, and one could tell that the relations aren't great. And you know, as a communications team, we said, well, why don't we broker some conversation? So I think the news to see those issues and act on them is important. And the simple thing we did was we said, while the structures are maybe at loggerheads, the structure meaning the city as a structure, as well as the organized business chamber as a structure, why don't we create a conversation platform with individual business leaders in the city, the biggest employers like Durban, Scott. And I tell you, through that engagement, we hosted a webinar with the heads of Volkswagen, Goodyear, Ford Motor Vehicle Company, and all the big ones. And suddenly, the voice of business, unmitigated and unfiltered through an organization, actually led to the package that was passed in council in terms of business relief and restructuring of municipal rates and that. So I think the point I want to make here is there is a role for communications, even in this economic conversation, to look for opportunities to build trust, and maybe not so much follow the structured engagement platforms that have always been there, but actually look for different opportunities, and good things can come out of it.
So Luvuyo and Mandla and Karen, I mean, and Karen, you started to touch on this. Do we run the risk of putting a lot of communication effort into big employers, 100 top companies and so forth, and then in fact we're getting hammered in the media because the most vulnerable parts of the economy that need the most support we might be missing, i.e. your informal sector and so forth. And how do we get that balance right? And particularly under this notion, Karen, of inclusive growth.
So for me, what I would imagine is needed is a communication plan, a shared communication plan across the city that basically says these are our key communication objectives to build trust, to build partnerships, to ensure inclusivity, sort of key objectives. And then sort of looking at what we are trying to address, if it's an economic recovery communication plan, or if it's a COVID-19 communication plan, that it's there. And then within that plan, one would segment one's stakeholders, and one would say within the city, what are the key issues that need to be communicated, and by whom, and on which platform. So we've spoken about like the private sector, but in terms of inclusion as well, we have to say, when you look at the private sector, there's messages for different groups, but you can't just give a single message. One has to protect, and one has to nurture one's relationships with your informal businesses, with your SMMEs, with some of your key sectors that are crucial to your economy, with your large players, because they're really important for rates, income, and contributions, and so on, and for job creation. So it's recognizing the importance, but not forgetting key segments within that stakeholder grouping. Within the community, I mean, we're talking about, and civil society, they also can't be neglected. So from the community side, there's so much need to talk to communities immediately about health and safety measures, to give that constant communication that if we are going to contain this pandemic, we all need to comply, we all need to make our contributions. But there's also communication around public transport issues. There's communication around social relief, given the high levels of food insecurity. There's the communication about the importance of communities to self-organize at this time so that they can assist each other and that they can engage government and lobby government and lobby other partners to come in. There's civil society groupings that one really wants to engage in around how do you co-create solutions around service delivery, around the challenges we're facing? How do you really encourage innovation? And that means that there have to be communication channels to enable that that participation and that engagement to happen. I see Lungedo's hand is up, so I'll stop there.
Lungedo?
Thank you very much, Karen and Rihanna, and thanks to colleagues for joining us. I suppose I mean I think the conversation is fascinating. I mean I was just reflecting that I think over recent years, I mean the business of government has changed, has dramatically changed, and I think with that there has obviously been transformation in terms of how government operates. In part because of the changing world, but also because we now have a rise in citizen expectations around what their governments should be doing, and part of what needed to change or needs to change is how as government we engage with our stakeholders, and I think perhaps there needs to be, like everything else, there needs to be an evolution in terms of how we communicate with our stakeholders and how we see that role and how that role is positioned in a city. I mean, I was a city communicator myself. Luvuyo will tell you this is not a myth. I know how difficult it can be, i.e. to access information, to make sense of the different pieces of information that exist and that sit in different silos within a city, and make sure that you can make sense of it and start to communicate on a more regular basis with your stakeholders. Perhaps one of the silver linings I see out of what is happening here is that we're probably going to start to take communication practice. I think the city leaders are going to start to take communication practice as a very important function within what a city needs to do. I mean, if you do your research, you'll see, if you go and look at some, I mean, in America, there's a new phenomenon that's emerging where they are leveraging new opportunities to shape government narrative, and they've come up with an I mean, I think it's in Detroit, where they have a person with the title chief storyteller for the city. So a chief storyteller is employed essentially to knit the story of the city together, and he's not a city communicator. He's not answering media queries. What he's doing is he's looking for opportunities to communicate the story of the city in an integrated way. So this chief storyteller is born out of a need by cities to see to it that they tell their own story, and unmitigated, as Luvuyo was saying, and try and get people to see exactly what's happening in a city. And I think the other issue that for me is probably needs to emerge out of what we're going through is that we need to hone our cities' listening skills. I think our cities do not listen. Our cities are talking. We are forever, as cities, we are forever talking. We are not listening. And honing a listening skill for a city is a whole new paradigm that perhaps we need to cultivate. And I think communicators have a role to play in that aspect. And I think the other issue for me is how you integrate communications and service delivery, because this should not be seen as two different things. The most successful cities around the world see communication as an integral part of the services that they deliver to their publics. And I also think that the last thing for me, Rihanna, would be what COVID has shown us is that we need to think flexibly about platforms. How in America, for example, they have something they call digital and open by default, which is what they're saying is that they've come to realize that they need to develop their core messages around the web. So the core messaging is around the web. They use the web. When I say the web, online digital platforms, they use them as their core source of engaging, because they say the world has changed. This is where people are. So we really need to think about how do we flexibly use platforms that are at our disposal to engage with our stakeholders. And I agree with Karen. When I was in Nelson Mandela Bay, we tried unsuccessfully to establish an internal communicators forum, because what we were arguing against was this issue of information that sits at different parts of the institution, and we are unable to access it. And what you know in cities, like Manda was saying, cities always have either their community workers, people who have information around what's happening in their development, in their department, and we're trying to get them into a structure so that we can access different pieces of information and try and consolidate and tell a story of a city. So I think these are things that I think as we go forward as communicators, we really need to examine and re-examine our practice, how we have been doing it, and whether or not the way we have been engaging and facilitating dialogue and discussion with our different stakeholders is still fit for purpose in a post-COVID environment, or in this environment, in a post-COVID environment. And I suppose then it not only relates to how we are recovering economically, but to other aspects of city life, how we are ensuring urban health security, how we are dealing with issues of service delivery, how we are dealing with issues of stakeholder engagement. So I think what you were saying, Karen, really it's about the only way we're going to build trust is if we are open about how we are communicating and people feel that there is access to information, and that access is unmitigated. And we're not spinning, because people always think that government is spinning. So there's always this uneasy tension between stakeholders and government in relation to whatever message we are articulating to the public. There's always a skepticism that clouds that communication. Thank you, Rihanna.
So Karen, as you get ready to respond, and I know we have to let you go in a few minutes, which is a pity. Just a couple of things. I mean, Nungeno, I'm very cognizant of the kind of language government uses and the difference between kind of partners versus stakeholders shifts how we're perceiving the partners we want to work with. But Karen, I'm going to allow you to kind of reflect. But one final question. I mean, what about messaging around buying local, support local businesses at this time, those who still have an income stream? You know, how do we shift communications from a doom and gloom scenario to also begin to ignite hope and the possibility of co-creating with others a future that is fundamentally different, but maybe somewhat better than where we've come from?
Yeah, so Rihanna, I just want to also thank Luncedo for his contribution. I think that's all exciting, and I think the potential is huge for communicators in terms of these innovations around storytelling and being listening cities and so on. So really love those ideas. Just maybe before I respond to you directly, some of the Ask Africa research has also come out with quite some useful feedback on what is the media used by the community for getting news on COVID-19 and a source of information. And I think for communicators, this is also useful to know. So apparently 78% of respondents use television and 62% use social media. So that's WhatsApp and Facebook and so on. And then 50% radio. So, television much more significant than radio, for example. And then only 21% newspapers, 20% community newspapers, and then outdoor media, about 17%. So really television and social media and radio are probably becoming still the main communication mediums. And I think one of the challenges for communicators at the moment is how to keep communicating under lockdown. How do you keep engaging communities and getting feedback? And so sort of virtual platforms and using social media and using television to try and provoke discussion, very critical. Yeah, in terms of moving away from like negative messaging to positive messaging, I think there's huge potential, and it really comes up from that partnership approach. And what I think, what we're trying to do, some of the work in the city support program, where we are working within township level, in a township space, or an industrial park space, or in a regional economic space, or in a central business district space, is to do it at a local level where you can get people to input, engage, to vision for that space also becomes more tangible. I mean, one can definitely sort of work up some excitement at a city space around how can we reimagine the city beyond COVID-19? What can we be doing? What did we like before COVID-19? What would we like to change? How can we change it into the future? But to do sort of work with, particularly in economic development, where you work at a particular space, an industrial park, with the stakeholders there, the workers, the firms, the community within it. You work within a particular township and trying to get people to reimagine, to redevelop, and to get principles about how you can really drive inclusion and how you can shift towards localization and so on at a real potential.
There's also a request from Samkelo, and I guess it's more for the organizers, but I think if between City Support Program and Cities Network, we can start looking at these asks. Can the Cities Network do this for our leaders, management as well, in the various other levels and sectors? This is very insightful, bigger than just communications. Are there similar dialogues like these taking place? And, I think this is an opportunity to begin to thread together, economic development, comms, service delivery, and a whole range of other things, health, data, digitization, that these are not separate parts of how communities experience government services. So, just wondering, based on Samkelo's request, whether there are opportunities between the Economic Development Managers Forum and the communications group that SACN has established to really come closer together in how we work and formulate our activities going forward.
So from my side, I really enjoyed engaging with the communicators, because it's often a sector, like from an economic development perspective, one thinks infrastructure, one thinks service delivery, one thinks social development, business development, but often one forgets about communication. And I think the Communicator Forum just highlights the fact that communication actually also integrates, it also links in, and it's really critical to our work, and communicators can play a really integral role, and we need to be thinking more clearly around that. I think these kinds of dialogues need to happen at different levels. They must happen within the city itself. The communicators, for me, should be engaging across sectors, bringing in economic development colleagues, saying, what are you doing around economic recovery? Help us, inform our communication strategy and plan, and let us inform your work as well, and a sort of input into what you're doing. So collaboration needs to also happen at city level. And then definitely at national level, I mean, I would be very keen to explore with SACN how we can maybe have a session where we bring the communicators and the economic development managers together and actually say, how can we facilitate this and really support what's happening at city level, at national level as well.
So I think we have another hand, Karen, if we can take that one. Tiro? Tiro, please come in.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to colleagues. My input is around the issue of messaging, considering the fact that as cities, we've got limited resources. So in this period of COVID-19, what messages should we prioritize? Or what should come first? Are we going to look into your top 100 and say these ones, they must take a bigger chunk of our communications budget? Or are you going to look at the vulnerable ones, trying to tell them when can they get their reliefs and the business reliefs and so forth? Or are you going to focus on your SMEs, considering the fact that they might not necessarily have your communication platforms that we are using now, like your Zoom and your social media platforms? So how are you going to penetrate that kind of target audience with the limited resources that we have, and the messages? Which messages you think would appeal to the majority of the community, as opposed to giving them your statistical information that the city is ideal for business opportunities, whereas at the same time you found that you've got thousands and thousands of SMEs. They're not even aware or not aware where can they access the business relief. So my issue basically is around messaging and agenda setting during this time of COVID-19. What comes first? Thank you.
Karen?
So maybe my immediate response would be saying, if you've got a very limited budget and if you're highly resource constrained, then for me, the focus has to be on the immediate challenges. And that needs to be communication broadly around health and safety. So how can we contribute, wearing of masks, socially distancing, washing hands, that kind of message very, very strongly. And then the other message for me, very, very strong, would be, where can I access relief and support? So those will be my two key focus areas in the immediate term. And then as one sort of moves forward, it's really around building those partnerships and those collaboration and giving opportunities through creating platforms for engagement. But the immediate message is focused on the immediate constraints and the disaster we're facing.
So Karen, I just want to leave you with a comment from Levuyo in the chat, where he says, my experience and what I see is that a lot of time is spent on media queries chasing information. As Karen says, data-backed communication strategies that demonstrate impact and make leaders take note until we get their attention, then communicators will remain at the back end, left out of key conversations and only seen as conveyors of decisions instead of contributors to decisions based on insights. So, Karen, I wish we had more time, because I think this is just the beginning of a discussion, and the economic recovery stuff is going to come so much more into focus. But really just on behalf of our communicator colleagues, to thank you for taking the time out to share with us some of what's happening in cities. I know we haven't been able to maximize the amount of information that I know you have, Karen, but we are super grateful for your participation, and hope that this is the beginning rather than the end of a relationship between our communicators and the economic recovery, both at city level, but also as a collective, because I think part of what we think at Cities Network is that we're just so much stronger as a collective of cities, as opposed to individual cities trying to do this on their own.
Yeah, just to thank Rihanna, SSE, and the colleagues for the opportunity to share this platform with you. I really enjoyed it. And just to urge communicators to step into the space, to define your role now in a new way and really to lead, because it's so needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and we'll release you now because we know you've got other stuff, but we'll be continuing to think about how communicators really step up and take their vital role in organization and society. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
So, colleagues, as Karen has indicated, and I think Luvuyo about elevating the role of communicators, we want to spend the 40 minutes we have left in conversation with you about how we best use this forum going forward, and what it is that you would like from it. So we did just prior to the previous webinar send out a questionnaire, but I know that because many of you are just so busy, there hadn't been time to work through that. So we've kind of brought back some of that and some new issues that we want to spend a bit of time focusing on. So I'm not sure who's screen sharing, but if you could please take us to, Sean, if you could just take us to the section of the board that's actually about the technical proposals for how we use this forum going forward. So colleagues, we're going to ask you to use the chat box so that we can really get maximum discussion in this session. But starting off with the question, what would you describe as your city's biggest challenge in relation to communication? So if you'll just use the chat box and the note taker colleagues will pull across from the chat box onto the mural board. So if you could start off with question 1, in your city, what is the biggest challenge in relation to communication? So please type into the chat. Okay, and if colleagues have kind of already done that, we'll start pulling across. Can we just project the screen in a way that the questions are a little bit clearer? So I think you need to, that's it. So we'd also be interested in any exciting and innovative communication work that you've done, and partnerships that you have been able to use to amplify your communication efforts. So please just keep typing responses to these questions, and just if you could just put the number of the question. So some of you are moving faster in responding to these than others. So just as you type, if you'd also put in the question number you're responding to. So at the moment we've got, I think, some responses to question 1. It would be great to hear more voices and more of you responding. So colleagues, I mean, we heard some interesting discussion in the conversation with Karen around innovative partnerships that you have used to amplify your communication efforts. If you have additional ones that we haven't heard, please feel free to post those.
So, sorry, Rihanna, how do we post?
So there's a chat box that allows you to be able to write up, but if you're not having that there and you want to just speak it into the meeting, that's also fine.
Okay, I'll look for the chat box.
So I'm not an MS Teams fan, I must confess. I'm much more of a Zoom person, so I am like everyone else. Can someone just help us? Where do we find the chat box on this panel?
Okay. So if you, so if you look at the bar at the bottom of this the screen on MS Teams, you've got the option to turn your camera, turn off your microphone, share screen, and just further down that there's a little speech bubble. And if you click on that, it should open up the chat, and then you can type in your response there.
I got it. Thank you.
Cool.
Part of our effort at learning to digitize together and getting better at some of this stuff. Okay, I'm going to move to question 3. If you could request assistance to enhance your communication efforts, what would be the issues that your city would like to get help with? What would be the areas that your city would like to get help with? Okay, and if we can then move to the 4th question, is there a greater voice for communications in the organization during this crisis? So in your city, have you had a sense that the organization is accepting the importance for communications? Colleagues, I've noted the request for the Ask Africa presentation. As you guys are working through these questions, Lebo, I wonder if I can ask you to just continue with the session, and I'm just gonna go onto my email, find the Ask Africa presentation so that we can post that onto the mural board as well whilst the session is on. If you can just keep moving Lebo or Lungedo through the questions with colleagues.
All right, we'll do that. Thanks. So colleagues, we've got most of your responses for the 3rd question. Just on the 4th point, is there greater voice for communications in your organization during this crisis? And I think for colleagues who haven't had an opportunity to respond on the chat box, you are welcome to, to respond verbally over the chat, over the call, if you haven't had a chance to type in your response.
Okay, so what I've also done, Lebo, is I've posted the Ask Africa survey week 12 results, which would have been the 16th to the 22nd of June. I've posted it both on the Communicators Forum WhatsApp group, and it will also be pulled onto this mural board, and then we can also email it after this session, just so that colleagues have access to it.
Great,
so
thank you, Rihanna.
You can keep running with this part of the session. I'm quite comfortable for you to keep going.
Okay. And then our final question, colleagues, is what do you think will be the longer term effects of the pandemic to city communicators in your region? So essentially in your cities, what do you think the impact of this pandemic has been? So 5 minutes to respond.
Hi, Lebo. The bar is sitting on top of the question. Will you please move the page up?
All right, Sean, can you just please assist with moving it up? Thanks.
Thank you.
So,
This was question number, are you 5 or 6?
We're at 5, and yeah, number 5 is, what do you think will be the longer term effects of the pandemic to your city communications? And then the final question is, what have you learned about moving events and meetings online? And if you could just share the best platforms and tools you have found in your spaces. All right, should I just give everyone 5 more minutes to respond to the last question, and then I think we can take a brief discussion on this section.
So, Lebo, do you want to keep running, or you want me to come in? As you can hear, the call to prayer is on in the background. But happy to come in. Happy for you to keep
I think I'll just make so just a few points on just some of the comments I'm seeing at the moment. So part of the reason why we had obviously asked these questions is for us to start optimizing this forum. And I think there's a point being made in one of the comments about learning from other colleagues being a key requirement or an ask from your side, and wanting to know how then we can help facilitate that and see how as colleagues you can learn from each other and duplicate certain best practices. So I think just judging from this conversation we had with Karen today, and the issue of how do we amplify the role of communicators in cities, this is really essentially why we set up this communicators forum. And at the moment, we're meeting on a monthly basis. And with the recent creation of the WhatsApp group, I think this is a space where we can all sort of decide how best we want to use this platform. So my thinking at the moment is that we start to see how we can collaborate with other reference groups in the SACN and how we can facilitate those meetings and share some of the learnings that are coming out from that. But that's just my kind of thinking at the moment, Rihanna.
So Lebo, I mean, firstly, let me thank you for taking over, and let me thank colleagues for some really interesting and exciting responses. And I'm quite intrigued between kind of Intatise and Mandla, and I think a couple of other colleagues have talked about budget, right? And the reality is, given the conversation we've just had on economic recovery, as well as the declining collection of rates and so forth, I think we can almost safely assume that we're going to have to learn to do more with less. And so it will be useful to hear from you how you would want for this forum convened by SACN, how best it can serve you. Also to say that just by way of platforms, I mean, we've found that Mural gives you quite a creative way. So we've been able to put videos, lots of other interesting and exciting ways to use Mural to supplement what you might be doing from a comms perspective. In another SACN breakaway group, for example, we've been buying data for people in informal settlements to become guests on some of our virtual forums, and that's actually been equipping them to digitize and use smartphones optimally and so forth. So I think we really want to spend the last few minutes we have together, the next 20 minutes or so, having a conversation about what would be most useful. We understand that you are all incredibly busy. So what would be most useful for you in this, how this forum could serve you? Lungedo, you have your hand up?
Thanks. I think perhaps we could perhaps use this opportunity as well to also reshare some of the thoughts that initially informed the creation of the reference group. I think Mandla will correct me. I think we launched the reference group in November last year in eThekwini. And the idea behind was that obviously the Cities Network's idea when it comes to cities is to make sure that we improve practice. It doesn't matter which area of operation. And we do that by making sure that we can generate knowledge. We can have that knowledge shared amongst colleagues through best practice and experience. And I think that those were really the fundamental reasons why we opted to develop this. And we thought that perhaps the urban story is not told in a manner that illuminates its value to the South African public. And we think that cities and city communicators are best placed to tell that story. And I think as a Cities Network, our view was that we will just facilitate the telling of the story, make sure that there is an integrated communications approach to how we tell the urban story. And I think that basically, I mean, these are the things that you deal with on a daily basis, some of them, but how do you then tell some of the more complicated stories? How do you perhaps take your GDS, for example, and be able to communicate your IDP and some of your plans, that your cities have, in a way that gives, and I mean, so, as you know, we have the IUDF in South Africa, which is the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which, I mean, gives a view in terms of what our urban, what our urban landscape should look like. And I think what we want to try is want to make sure that as a collective of cities, we are able to tell a singular story around what this means, but obviously also annotated by your various local realities and conditions. And I think that part of what we had committed to do as well, Rihanna, was that, if there's research that needs to be done around communications, and I think that and there's a collective view from cities that perhaps this is where we think we need information, the cities network will then be able to then champion that kind of work, so that we are able to pool resources. And I think the other issue that we've been raising here is the issue around the availability of resources to do some of this work. I think some of the more generic work, I think we can, assist and facilitate as the cities network and make sure that that is done and it becomes available to cities. For example, at this, as we speak now, we are doing an animated series on the IUDF. And looking at all those levers of the IUDF, issues around integrated transport, into issues around the economy and all of that stuff, and trying to explain what those things are. And that content is going to become freely available. We will give to you to use in your own platforms. For example, when you want to talk about certain certain issues that are taking place in your cities. So I think this, for me, we should, there was a discussion we had, for example, in Durban around issues around media monitoring and all of that stuff, and whether or not there are more creative ways to do that. The Cities Network, for example, does media monitoring on all the cities. So we collect that information for our own purposes. But how do we then make sure that we pool our resources together to make sure that we can do much more in relation to improving practice for communications. So basically that was also the thinking. And the other thing obviously was to avail this platform like we did today, like we had Karen, that we can bring influential speakers and people in various sectors who we think who we have an interest in as communicators in trying to improve our practice and make sure that they can interact with us. And also, maybe more importantly, is that you also can interact with each other, so that Mandla can interact with Ntatisi, Samkelo can interact with Luvuyo, so that there's just free information flow amongst yourselves, so that you can better improve how you carry out communication in your own cities. So those were some of the issues that drove us to create this platform for you. Thanks, Rana.
Okay, so in November, you knew why you wanted to start this platform. By February, March, COVID had arrived. We've had a couple of virtual sessions, but how do we want to shape this to serve you? Because the last thing we want is to set these things up and they become another pain on your to-do list. We'd love for you to actually be able to derive value from these sessions. So it would be useful to get an indication based on the background that Lungedo's given and some of the ideas that had been agreed to in eThekwini, whether there are now additional asks that you might have, and also not just what you want to extract, but also what you want to contribute and give in. And I know that many of you, are very enthusiastic to also share. So can we take a couple of hands for the minutes we have left? And I know right at the beginning, colleagues were starting to share some of what's happened in their cities when you were checking in. So this is also an opportunity now to say, how you want to use this forum, but if you also want to share some inspiring ideas, that would be great. So can I note hands? I can also volunteer people if you want. Okay, we have Rego, and then Luvuyo.
Okay, I was gonna type, but I think it's gonna be long. For me, what would really help this platform is that we don't just gather when there's a webinar or in the past we'd have a meeting, but that it becomes a repository, some form of information, like a repository where we can go and source information, best practices. You find that City of Cape Town is doing something, Joburg is doing something else, whereas we could learn from each other, as opposed from starting from scratch. If I need something, like right now we want to appoint a media agency because we found that other platforms that we have used to go direct doesn't really serve us. It provides some limitations. So I could just come to you guys and say, please advise how City of eThekwini or Buffalo have embarked on this. And instead of us starting from scratch and developing an item and all that, we could actually get something readily available and say, it will actually improve our productivity and save time and make us better communicators. Like a previous one of the officials in this group mentioned that we find ourselves chasing media inquiries, being reactive. We really just chasing our tails, and I think there's many ways. The one is the one that I mentioned. Things like communication strategies, to say that we are faced with the same challenges as cities. Our communication is really the same. That we learn from each other strategies and say, this is how I formulated mine, and say, okay, where is it that I could share this and whatever? What are the differences in whatever affects this city as opposed to that? I think the Ask Africa research has really been beneficial, and it's giving us a bit of light in terms of where we should be communicating and how. I think the key thing is the platforms. I like what you said that, I don't know, I think one of the officials mentioned that they were giving the SMMEs data so that they can participate on some of the forums. So those are the things that we can look at, because municipalities are so regulated. We always have to think of how is it that we give communities data so that it's not seen as bribery. Sometimes a media can see it as buying votes or something like that. It can really be looked at differently, and the purpose thereof can be misconstrued. So it's important that we share that knowledge much more, other than just being here. And when that, I don't know if you create a group, I think there's a WhatsApp group, but I'm happy to be in the group and that we share those kind of documents. Thank you.
Wonderful. Luvuyo, and then Tobeka.
Thank you for that. I think without repeating what's been said, I mean, these platforms are great, but I've also been one to kind of avoid talk shops, to be honest. You've got different structures. You've got the GCIS structures that, you pop in once and it's talk until we talk again. Nothing happens in between. So I completely avoid those things. I think maybe just to add value going forward over and above what's been suggested, perhaps maybe, cities are given some roles or tasks to present on certain topics, on specific work that they're doing, but specifics, be given a brief. just so that we can engage on specifics and tactical stuff that we can learn from, in terms of, you know, how people approach different scenarios. So, you know, how did City X deal with XYZ? And you know, we'll start looking at it. We'll start thinking about it. When City X presents their case study, we've got something to, you know, to throw in and have a conversation about. So that's all I would like to suggest for now.
Thanks, Luvuyo. Tobeka? And then I know Sean as well.
Thank you, Rihanna. I'm sorry, guys. It's just that I'm in 2 meetings at once. I'm not sure if I missed this one. For me, there seems to be a bit of a challenge in terms of cascading the information to the people that are not necessarily on the social media platforms. So I'm more interested from our colleagues, I don't know if this is going to be included in the strategies that we are speaking about, as what has been the solution in their municipalities. Because as much as, you know, whatever issues that are taking place and in terms of communication, we are not reaching the audience that is out there, especially some of us who have got wards in the rural areas, in some of the townships. Not everybody is on Facebook, not everybody has a smartphone. What has been other creative ways of getting the information out there? And also, Rihanna, you are aware of our situation at the municipality in terms of finances, and the situation has not gotten any better, especially with regards to the fact that people don't have money to pay rates. So then it becomes difficult. I'm hearing creative ideas such as giving out data to your business sector and what have you. In light of where we don't have money, and unfortunately the situation is dire with the crashing economy and so forth, what other ways we can do in terms of engaging with other stakeholders? I think for me, yeah, that is my contribution, because I think it's a bit sad that people are not happy in terms of service delivery. Some of the promises that were made, we are not meeting them, but there isn't that clear two-way communication. We seem to be focusing on the social media, your Twitter, your Facebook, but the large number of population is not getting information. So yeah, thank you. If I can be assisted in that, I don't know, some sort of guidance, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, Rihanna.
Thanks, Tobeka. Sean?
Hi, thanks, Rihanna. Colleagues, good afternoon. Just to also remind you guys, I think some of you might have been added to it, but the South African Cities Network developed an extranet portal about a year ago for all our various reference groups. And basically this portal is just a platform for our respective reference groups to all be able to participate and collaborate on. So it's a safe space where members of this communicators reference group can basically share and interact with their fellow colleagues in the various different cities that are part of our reference group. So what we'll do after this meeting as well, we'll just recirculate the link, as well as seeing who might not be added to this portal, just so that you have a central spot where you're able to collaborate with the SSC and comms team, as well as the various communications practitioners from the various cities. Thanks, Rihanna.
Thanks, Sean. So Tobeka, I mean, I think just in, you know, not direct response, I think Antoinette has also shared some ideas in the chat around what they've done in Tshwane, but I think for me, the crux of Karen's presentation is that in this period, we're going to have to step up on partnerships. And I think we're going to have to be a lot more creative than we're used to being in city government around how we use partnerships, because we're all in this thing together. I think if we can create this notion of we're government and we've got our act together around how we're going to deal with economic recovery or the pandemic or the health impact. So for example, just, you know, what are the relationships we're building with digital service providers who operate in our spaces. The city already has cell phone contracts and so forth that it's paying for. Can we start speaking to MTN, Vodacom, Cell C, Telkom around, how are you willing to come to the party in terms of how we can communicate directly with our constituents? The age-old kind of community leaders and their ability to communicate messaging. And then I think the issues that Lungedo's raised about how do we move from always speaking to listening. So I think, we're going to have to be thinking quite differently and creatively. So there's the, the good old fashioned loud hailing stuff, which, might feel like it's no longer vogue, but still works for many communities. So I think, Luvuyo, I think it's useful that you're reminding us that we don't want these sessions to degenerate into just talk shops, that they must be useful, that the WhatsApp group is useful between meetings, and then when we do meet, that we get cities to have specific roles and tasks, I think is a really useful idea. So I'm going to hand over to Lungedo and Lebogang for the last 5 minutes and closing how we'll pull together some of what's happened in this session and move it forward. Lebo or Lungedo, I'm not sure who's going.
Lebo can close, Rihanna, that's fine.
All right. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you again for your input and, just generally the ideas that have been coming from today's session. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for communicators in cities, and I think, as we discussed earlier, the onus is on us to elevate the role of communicators. So with regards to, amplifying these sessions and making them of value to you, I do take note of, the development of a communication repository. I think that's very important that we set that up, and we will be doing that moving forward. And I definitely support the idea of having more targeted conversations on the various case studies that the cities are applying, or strategies that you're all applying to deal with your communication activities. So, without repeating much of what's been said, I think we'll just need to strengthen our partnerships and continue to just work together. And the WhatsApp group platform is available for that at the moment. So I'd encourage every single person in this call to please join the WhatsApp group, and let's continue this conversation offline. And I encourage also colleagues to chat to each other on the group. That's essentially the reason we created the platform. And with that being said, I look forward to our next session. And I think what we'll then do is perhaps run some ideas through the group to see what colleagues think would be the next best conversation to start with, so that we have a more two-way conversation between ourselves versus us developing the concept on our own. But I think for this to be of value to everyone and not be a talk shop, that approach to me seems the best way forward. So again, colleagues, thank you very much for making time and joining us today. And, we look forward to taking this conversation forward.
So Lebo, I just want to add one final thing. I mean, I don't think we must underestimate the importance of the wellness and the well-being of our practitioner colleagues and communicators. And there are very few safe spaces where people can deal with their own humanity and the challenges we're all facing at an individual level, at a community level. And whilst we focus on communications, I think we must find a way to also thread in the wellness of our communicators in this period.
Absolutely.
And also, Rihanna, perhaps just as a last comment from me, and I think if there is any research work that colleagues want to suggest that they think needs to be be done from a communications perspective. And I think we are better placed to facilitate that as the Cities Network. I mean, part of our reason for existence is to generate knowledge which improves practice. So I just think that to also give, I mean, on this issue of on the value proposition of the reference group, that's part of what we have committed to doing. If there's work that can benefit the entirety of the cities from a research perspective, and I think that is part of what we've committed to do, and that in fact is reflected in the new agreements between the Cities Network and the cities in relation to some of the communication work that needs to be done by the cities to make sure that they can communicate the urban story. So I think colleagues can, I mean, in that extranet portal, for example, or on the WhatsApp line, we can start then positing these ideas so that then we can develop and agree to them and develop them further as the Cities Network. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Lumino. Tobeka, I'm noting your hand, but I'm also noting that it has gone 1 o'clock, so there might be people who need to leave, but we'll take that hand.
I don't know, Rihanna, but on our next discussion, can we, given the fact that we are going towards the month of August, the issue of gender-based violence, it's now a national crisis. So I think we as communicators, we need to discuss that. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Colleagues, thank you very much for your participation. As usual, we will clean up the mural board and make sure that you get it as soon as possible after this meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.